The snow fell in sheets of silver, each flake a small death against her skin. Kira's feet no longer felt the ice beneath them, only the burning cold that had become her entire world. 3 days. 3 days since the rejection ceremony, since the Alpha King himself had stood before the assembled pack and spoken words that shattered bone and soul alike. She bears no mark. She carries no scent of destiny. She is not my mate. The words had echoed through the great hall like a curse. Around her, the pack's eyes had transformed from hope to pity to something worse, erasure. She had felt it then, the collective turning away, the severing of every invisible thread that bound her to the only home she had ever known. By nightfall, she was exiled. By dawn, she was forgotten. Now the mountains held her, indifferent and eternal. Kira's breath came in ragged gasps, visible only as frost suspended in the darkness. Her fingers had turned the color of ash, and her lips had lost all warmth. The torn cloak that had once marked her as a member of the northern pack now hung from her shoulders like a funeral shroud, its silver threading catching the moonlight and holding it prisoner. She stumbled forward because stopping meant death, and she was not yet brave enough for that mercy. The forest pressed in from all sides, ancient pines bent under the weight of snow, their branches reaching like skeletal hands. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, her body tensed instinctively, waiting for the kill. She was vulnerable, alone, and her scent marked her as packless, worthless, easy prey. But the howl faded, replaced by silence so complete it felt like drowning in air. Kira collapsed beside a frozen stream, her back against a boulder still warm from some distant memory of sun. Her eyes were beginning to close when she heard it, the sound of something massive moving through the snow, deliberate and unhurried. Not the frantic movements of a hunting wolf, but something heavier, something that did not fear the darkness. Through the blur of her vision, she saw him. He emerged from between the pines like the mountain itself had learned to walk. His fur was dark as midnight forged in blood, and his eyes, those terrible, luminous eyes, burned with a light that had nothing to do with the moon. He was enormous, his shoulders easily twice the width of any wolf she had ever encountered. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle and ran down his front legs like a written history of suffering. Kira tried to move, to stand, to do something other than lie there like a broken thing waiting to be devoured. But her body would not obey. Fear and cold had turned her into stone. The wolf approached, each step deliberate. She could hear his breathing now, could see the vapor rising from his nostrils. When he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his enormous frame, he stopped. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, impossibly, the great wolf lowered himself onto his haunches. His massive head tilted, and those burning eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to scream. She could feel something shifting in the air around them, a pressure, a weight, a presence so profound it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. His nostrils flared, inhaling deeply. She watched, paralyzed, as his massive body tensed. She braced for the bite, for the tearing pain that would end this cold vigil. Instead, he threw back his head and released a howl that shattered the night sky. It was a sound of anguish and fury, and something else, something that sounded almost like recognition. The other wolves answered from distant peaks, their voices joining his in a chorus that seemed to make the stars themselves tremble. But the great wolf's howl continued, rising and falling like a prayer in a language only gods could understand. When silence finally returned, he turned his massive head back to her. His eyes had changed. The burning intensity remained, but now it was tempered with something that looked almost like sorrow. He lay down beside her, his body a furnace of warmth in the frozen night, and did not move again. Kira, against every instinct screaming in her blood, did not run. When she woke, The world was gold. Sunlight poured through cracks in stone, illuminating dust motes that drifted like tiny univerflies through a vast cavern. Kira's eyes fluttered open slowly, her mind swimming through layers of sleep and delirium. She was warm, impossibly, miraculously warm. Heat radiated from the furs beneath her and the blankets piled atop her body. She sat up carefully, her movements stiff and painful. Every muscle screamed in protest, but the sharp edges of frostbite had dulled to a manageable ache. Her fingers and toes, though still discolored, had regained some semblance of feeling. The cavern was vast and ancient, its walls smooth as if worn by centuries of wind and water. A fire burned in a stone hearth at the cavern's center, flames dancing in shades of amber and crimson. But it was the figure sitting motionless beside those flames that made her breath catch. He was human now. The man was enormous, even in his human form, his shoulders broad and muscled beneath a loose linen shirt. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his face bore the same scars she had seen on the wolf, mapped across his jawline and temples like a record of wars fought in both forms. But it was his eyes that held her paralyzed. They were the same burning gold, the same ancient intelligence, but now they carried the weight of 1,000 regrets. "You're awake," he said quietly. His voice was deep, resonant, like thunder rolling through distant mountains. "Your fever broke 3 hours ago. I was beginning to think you might not survive after all." Kira opened her mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked and bleeding. The man rose fluidly, despite his massive size. His movements were graceful, and retrieved a bowl of something steaming from near the fire. He returned and knelt beside her, extending it with surprising gentleness. "Drink," he commanded, and it was not a suggestion. "Slowly. Your body needs water more than warmth now." She accepted the bowl with trembling hands and sipped. The liquid was warm broth, rich with herbs and bone marrow, and it brought tears to her eyes. She drank until the bowl was empty, then looked up at the stranger who had saved her life. "Who are you?" she whispered. Something flashed across his face. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. He stood and walked back to the fire, his movements suddenly rigid with tension. "Someone who should not have found you," he said. "Someone who should not care that you were left to die." "The Alpha King," Kira breathed, understanding crashing over her like a wave. "You're him. You're the one who rejected you." He turned back to face her, and his eyes blazed with an emotion she could not name. "Yes, I am Kieran Blackthorn, King of the Northern Wolves. I am the one who stood in that hall and denied you before my entire pack." Kira's instinct was to recoil, but something held her still. She could see it now. The conflict warring in every line of his body, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Then why?" she asked. "Why save me?" "Because my wolf would not stop howling," he said bitterly. "Because since the moment you entered the bonding chamber 3 weeks ago, something in my blood has recognized you in a way that makes no sense. Because when I rejected you, I felt my own soul crack open like ice beneath a thaw." He turned away from her, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Because you were not supposed to be my mate. And I cannot bear that my body knows what my mind refuses to accept." Kira sat very still, processing his words. The bonding ceremony was one of the most sacred rituals in pack law. An Omega and Alpha stood before the assembled wolves, and if they were true mates, soul-bound by the will of the goddess herself, they would bear matching marks, and their wolves would recognize each other with absolute certainty. She had felt nothing. No mark had appeared on her skin. No divine recognition had flooded her senses. But Kieran, the Alpha King, had felt something. Enough to save her. Enough to bring her to this hidden place and tend her wounds through the night. "I don't understand," she said. "Neither do I," Kieran replied, "and that terrifies me more than any enemy ever could." He moved to the far side of the cavern, where a pool of crystalline water reflected the firelight like liquid silver. He knelt beside it, and in the reflection, Kira could see the war being waged behind his eyes. "Rest," he commanded. "Your body needs more time to heal. We will discuss what happens next when you are stronger." But as he spoke, his hand went to his chest, directly over his heart, and for just a moment she saw it, a faint silver mark beginning to form beneath his shirt, visible only in the flickering firelight, a mark that had not been there before. By the 5th day, Kira could walk to the cavern's entrance without assistance. The hidden valley beyond was breathtaking, a cradled pocket of earth surrounded by mountains so tall they seemed to pierce the clouds themselves. A frozen river wound through it like a scar, its surface smooth and glittering. The sky above held that peculiar quality of light unique to high altitudes, where the sun seemed both distant and intimate. Kieran watched her from his position near the fire, his golden eyes tracking her every movement. He had spoken little over the past days, maintaining a careful distance that felt both protective and tormented. He brought her food, ensured her wounds were cleaned and wrapped, and retreated into silence, but she had noticed the marks appearing on his skin. They began on his chest and spread slowly across his shoulders and down his arms, intricate silver patterns that resembled ancient runes. Kira had recognized them immediately, soul marks. The physical manifestation of a bond being forged, a connection forming at levels deeper than flesh. "It's impossible," she had whispered when she first saw them. "Yes," Kieran had agreed. And yet, now, watching the valley, she felt his presence before she heard him approach. "The cold doesn't bother you anymore," he observed. "No," she said. "It's strange. Since I woke in this place, the cold feels like a friend, like it's welcoming me instead of trying to kill me." Kieran moved to stand beside her, maintaining a careful distance. In his human form, he was terrifying in his beauty, all sharp angles and coiled power, his scarred face bearing the weight of decisions that had cost him deeply. "That is because your wolf is beginning to awaken," he said quietly. "The transformation takes longer for Omegas. Most of your kind shift before adolescence, but you—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "You never shifted. There was something preventing it. Fear, perhaps. Or a wound to your spirit so profound that your wolf could not find its way forward." Kira felt tears prick her eyes. He was right. All her life, she had been different. While other young wolves transformed easily, finding joy and freedom in their animal forms, she had remained stubbornly human. The pack had whispered about it. Cursed bloodlines, they said. Defective genetics, insufficient connection to the goddess. "When I rejected you," Kieran continued, his voice raw, "I told myself it was because you bore no mark, because the bond ceremony would not complete. But the truth—" He paused, struggling with the words. "The truth is that I was afraid. My wolf knew you were his mate immediately. My wolf wanted to kneel before you, to offer you every piece of himself. And I could not allow that." "Why not?" she whispered. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the frozen river below. "Because I have already destroyed one mate," he said finally. 20 years ago, before I became king. Her name was Ilara, and I loved her desperately. But I was young and reckless, and I made enemies of powerful people. They took her from me. They burned her alive in a cage of silver, and I was powerless to stop it. I felt her death through our bond, Kira. I felt every moment of her suffering." His voice had become a whisper, barely audible over the wind that swept through the valley. "After that, I swore I would never take another mate. I would keep my people safe by refusing to give them another weapon to use against me. And then you walked into that chamber, and my wolf recognized you as though the goddess herself had whispered your name into my blood." Kira turned to look at him fully. In the daylight, his scars were more visible, but they no longer looked like marks of weakness. They looked like proof that he had survived unbearable things. "So you pushed me away," she said, understanding finally. "I rejected you in the cruelest way possible," he confirmed. "I tried to sever the bond before it could form. I thought if I could deny you publicly, humiliate you, make you unwanted, then perhaps the goddess would accept my rejection and release you from whatever cruel fate she had bound us to." "But the bond was already forming," Kira said, watching the silver marks that covered his exposed skin. "Yes," Kieran said, "it was already formed. It was written into our very souls before either of us took a single breath. And when I rejected you—" He looked at her finally, and his eyes were devastated. "When I rejected you, I felt my own wolf begin to die from the inside out. The pain of severing a soul bond that refuses to be broken, it's beyond description. It's a death while living." Kira reached out, her hand moving before she could think better of it. She pressed her palm against one of the silver marks on his chest, directly over his heart. The moment her skin touched his, a shock of electricity ran through her entire body. Kieran gasped, his eyes going wide. Around them, the valley seemed to hold its breath. "You feel it too," he said, not a question. "Yes," Kira whispered, "like lightning in my veins." As she watched, the silver mark beneath her palm began to glow, brighter and brighter until it rivaled the sun itself. And something shifted inside her chest, a crack forming in a wall she had not known was there, a door opening to a part of herself that had been locked away for her entire life. Her wolf stirred. It was not a painful transformation, as she had always feared. Instead, it felt like coming home. Like pieces of herself that had been scattered across a lifetime were finally finding their way back to her. She could feel the change beginning, her senses expanding, her connection to the earth deepening, her power awakening like a creature from ancient sleep. But just as suddenly, Kieran pulled away. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not yet. You're not ready. Your human form is still too fragile from the illness." Kira felt the awakening halt, the door slamming shut once more. The sensation was devastating, like being pulled back from the edge of a cliff. "Why won't you let me?" she demanded. "Why won't you accept this?" "Because if I accept this," Kieran said, backing away from her, "then I accept that I am bound to you. And that means you are in danger. Terrible, unforgivable danger." He turned and walked back toward the cavern, his massive shoulders rigid with tension. "There are those who would see me destroyed," he called back. "My enemies are countless, and they grow bolder with each passing year. Taking a mate, allowing the bond to complete, would make you a target. The one thing in this world that could break me, and I will not, I cannot, put you in that position." Kira stood alone in the valley, her hand still tingling from where she had touched him. Behind her, the frozen river seemed to pulse with silver light, reflecting something vast and ancient in its depths. And in the cavern behind, she heard the Alpha King howl, a sound of such anguished longing that it made the mountains weep. On the 8th day, Kieran took her hunting. Not for food, the cavern was well stocked with preserved meat and herbs, but to teach her, to prepare her for the transformation that was no longer a question of if, but when. "Your wolf will emerge fully within days," he had told her that morning. "Your body is strong enough now, and the bond is pulling you forward. You cannot fight it any longer, so I will teach you how to survive it." They stood now at the edge of a frozen lake, the morning light casting long shadows across the ice. Kieran was in his human form, but Kira could see the tension in his body. His wolf was close to the surface, eager to be free. "The first transformation is the most painful," he said, his voice steady and instructive. "Your bones will break and reform. Your organs will rearrange themselves. Your mind will expand to accommodate the consciousness of your wolf. Many Omegas never recover from that first shift. They are trapped between forms, neither fully human nor animal. But you said my wolf was strong, Kira replied. I can feel it now. It's like a presence in my mind, waiting. Your wolf is not strong, Kiran corrected. Your wolf is ancient. There is a difference. He turned to face her fully, and his scarred face was serious in a way that made her blood quicken. I have been researching the old texts, the histories that predate even the establishment of our pack, he continued. There is a legend of a wolf born once every 1,000 years, a pathfinder. A wolf who can walk between worlds, who can sense the threads of fate itself, who can heal what has been broken by speaking truths that reality itself cannot deny. Kira felt something stir in her chest, not her wolf, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or memory of a life lived long before this one. I think you might be, Kiran interrupted, which means your existence is not a mistake or a defect. It means you were sent here for a reason. And it means that refusing to complete our bond is not protecting you. It's preventing you from becoming what you were always meant to be. He took a step toward her, and despite his obvious effort at restraint, she could see the conflict warring in every line of his body. But I cannot ask you to accept that burden, he continued. I cannot ask you to take on the responsibility of being a pathfinder, of carrying the weight of a power that most wolves can barely comprehend. It's not fair, it's not. Kira moved closer to him, her eyes fixed on his. What if I'm asking you? Kiran's breath caught. Kira, what if I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting? She said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. What if I'm something that needs to be free? What if this bond, this connection between us, what if it's not a weakness, but a strength? She reached out and took his hand, pressing it to her chest where her heart beat rapid and alive beneath her ribs. I felt you calling to me in the snow. I felt you howling in anguish when you pulled away from me. And I felt something else. I felt your wolf recognizing mine, acknowledging it, honoring it. That's not rejection. That's not fear. That's love. Kiran's hand trembled against her chest. Love is a luxury I cannot afford. Then we'll afford it together, Kira replied. In the distance, a raven cried out, a sound both haunting and beautiful. And in that moment, something shifted in the fabric of reality itself. The ice beneath their feet began to glow with soft, silver light, spreading outward in concentric circles. The light rose up around them like a vortex, and Kira felt the presence of something vast and incomprehensibly ancient, the goddess herself, perhaps, bearing witness to this moment. Kiran pulled Kira close, his massive frame enveloping hers entirely. If you do this, if you accept me, and I accept you, there is no going back. The bond will be absolute. Our fates will be intertwined forever. And the enemies who want to destroy me will want to destroy you just as much. I know, Kira whispered. And you would choose that? Choose me. Knowing what it will cost? Kira looked up at him, and in his golden eyes, she saw the beautiful broken man beneath the king. The man who had loved once and lost everything. The man who was terrified of loving again but was doing it anyway. I would choose you in every lifetime, she said. In every world, in every form, in every age. I would choose you. Kiran's mouth found hers, and their first kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of souls, a joining of powers, a claiming of fate itself. Around them, the silver light exploded outward, and Kira felt the soul bond complete, a snap of absolute rightness that left no room for doubt or hesitation. They were one now, not one body, but one spirit, one fate, one destiny, one heart beating in two chests. When they finally separated, Kiran's eyes had changed. The pain was still there, but it was tempered now with something that looked almost like hope. Now, he said, his voice rough with emotion, let me show you what you truly are. He raised his hand to the sky, and the silver light responded to his call. It wrapped around them both like a cloak, and Kira felt herself beginning to transform, not in fear or pain, but in joy. Her wolf was not emerging. It was being born. Her first full moon as a wolf was transcendent. Kira's paws touched the snow-covered earth, and she felt the pulse of the world beneath her, every root, every buried seed, every sleeping creature in hibernation. Her senses had expanded to encompass the entire valley, and beyond it, the mountains themselves seemed to acknowledge her presence. Kiran ran beside her in his wolf form, his massive body moving with the grace of ancient power. Their minds were connected now. She could feel his thoughts, his emotions, his wonder at experiencing the world through her perception for the first time. And through their bond, she felt something else. Pain. Distant but growing steadily closer. The presence of other wolves, not of their pack, but hunters, enemies. Kiran skidded to a halt, his massive body tense. Through their connection, Kira understood immediately. They were under attack. A rival pack had discovered their location, and they were coming in force. "We have to run," Kira's wolf urged. But Kiran's consciousness flooded through the bond with absolute certainty. "No, we stand, we fight, and you will finally understand what it means to be my mate." He shifted back to human form, and Kira watched in awe as the silver marks across his body began to glow. More marks appeared, ancient runes that covered his entire form in a tapestry of power. His eyes blazed gold so bright they hurt to look at, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of dominion itself. "Change," he commanded Kira. "Show them what a pathfinder can do." Kira shifted back to human form, her body trembling with the exertion and the power flowing through her veins. And then she felt it, a presence in her mind that was not Kiran, not her own wolf, but something vast and terrible and beautiful beyond measure. The goddess. "You have come into your purpose," a voice like thunder and honey spoke directly into her consciousness. "The bond is complete, the pathfinder is awakened, and now the choice before you is simple. Will you save him, or will you save yourself?" Before Kira could respond, a massive wolf burst through the tree line, followed by dozens more. The rival pack had arrived, and they were led by an alpha whose scar matched Kiran's own. An old wound, a history of enmity. "Kiran Blackthorn," the rival alpha growled, his voice carrying the power of an alpha command. "You have violated the ancient laws by bonding with an Omega who was not properly introduced to the Pack Council. You have defied the collective will, and for this, you must surrender your crown and your life." Kiran stepped forward, his body radiating absolute calm. But Kira could feel his fear through the bond, not fear for himself, but fear for her. Fear that she would be harmed, fear that his enemies would find in her the weapon they had always sought. "She is my mate," Kiran said simply, "bonded by the will of the goddess herself. Your laws are meaningless in the face of divine decree." "Then you choose death," the rival alpha snarled. He lunged, and what happened next occurred in a cascade of moments that seemed both instant and eternal. Kiran met the charge head-on, shifting into his wolf form mid-leap. The two alphas collided with the force of mountains falling, and the other wolves surged forward to join the fray. But something extraordinary happened. As the violence erupted around her, Kira felt the goddess's presence surge within her. Her body began to change, but not into the form of a normal wolf. Her fur became silver, luminous, marked with the same ancient runes that covered Kiran's human skin. Her eyes blazed with light so pure it cast shadows that fell in impossible directions. And when she moved, reality itself seemed to bend around her. The attacking wolves halted in their assault, their instincts screaming at them to flee from a power they could not comprehend. Even the rival alpha paused mid-strike, his ancient eyes widening in recognition. "Pathfinder," he whispered, fear and awe mingling in his voice. Kira opened her mouth, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from the earth itself. "I do not wish to fight you," she said, and the power in her words made several of the wolves collapse to their knees. "But I will defend my mate, and if you continue this assault, I will be forced to show you the cost of defying the goddess's will." The rival alpha staggered backward, suddenly looking far older than he had moments before. Around him, his pack began to withdraw, their courage shattered by the revelation of what Kira truly was. "You cannot win," Kieran's enemy said bitterly. "Even with a pathfinder at your side, the council will never accept this. They will see her as an abomination, a disruption of the natural order. They will come for you both with everything they have." "Then we will greet them with everything we are," Kira replied, and Kieran howled in agreement, a sound of triumph and defiance and absolute acceptance. As the rival pack fled into the darkness, Kira shifted back to human form and ran to Kieran, who was breathing heavily but uninjured. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Yes," he agreed, "and you did it anyway." He pulled back just far enough to look at her, and in his golden eyes she saw the man she had chosen reflected back at her, scarred, broken, but finally allowing himself to heal. "Now comes the hardest part," he said quietly. "Now we have to convince the Pack Council that what we are, what you are, is not a threat, but a salvation." Kira took his hand and pressed it to her chest, directly over the silver mark that now resided there, a perfect mirror of the mark that covered his heart. "Then we do it together," she said, "as mates, as partners, as equals in this destiny." And in the frozen valley below, the river began to flow once more, carrying the warmth of spring toward a world that had waited long for redemption to be reborn. The great hall of the northern pack was a cavernous space carved from living rock, its walls adorned with tapestries that chronicled 1,000 years of history. Massive torches burned along the vaulted ceiling, casting dancing shadows that made the assembled wolves seem to shift and reform with each flicker of flame. Kira stood at the center of the hall, Kieran beside her, and felt the weight of every eye in the chamber bearing down upon her like a physical force. The Pack Council, 13 ancient wolves, each bearing the scars of wars long past, regarded her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. At the head of the council sat Elder Morrigan, a she-wolf whose fur had turned silver with age, but whose eyes still held the brightness of a predator. She had been Kieran's mentor, the one who had guided him to kingship after his first mate's death. Her expression was unreadable, which somehow made her more frightening than if she had simply condemned them both outright. "You claim this Omega is your true mate," Elder Morrigan said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And yet you rejected her publicly 3 weeks past, before the entire pack. Your own words declared her unworthy of the bond. How do you justify this reversal?" Kieran stepped forward, and despite the vulnerability of the moment, he carried himself with the absolute confidence of a king. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I rejected her out of fear, not truth. I told myself it was because she bore no mark, but the real reason was because I feared losing her the way I lost my first mate. I sought to protect her by pushing her away, but in doing so, I nearly destroyed us both." He extended his hand to Kira, and she took it without hesitation. The moment their skin touched, the silver marks across both their bodies began to glow, visible even beneath their clothing. A murmur ran through the assembled pack, some of awe, some of fear, some of something that might have been recognition. "But there is more," Kieran continued. "The rejection was not merely a failure of judgment on my part. It was a test." He looked directly at Elder Morrigan. "In the old texts, the ones you taught me to read, it is written that a pathfinder cannot bond with a weak mate or a mate unsuitable to bear the weight of such a destiny. The pathfinder's essence requires an alpha of sufficient power and integrity to stand beside her." It requires a mate who has been tested by fire and found not wanting. Are you suggesting, another council member interjected, a scarred wolf named Gareth, that your rejection of this Omega was orchestrated? That it was part of some greater plan? I am suggesting, Kieran replied, that the goddess works in ways we cannot always comprehend, and that true mates are sometimes forged in the fires of rejection rather than embraced in the comfort of acceptance. Kira felt her heart racing, but she understood what Kieran was doing. He was reframing the narrative, transforming what had been a public humiliation into an act of divine wisdom. It was brilliant, and it was also desperately dangerous. If the council did not believe him, they would see it as manipulation and condemn them both. Elder Morrigan rose slowly from her seat. All other council members fell silent, waiting for her pronouncement. She descended from the raised platform where the council sat and approached Kira, her ancient eyes studying her with an intensity that felt like being pierced by daggers. "Show me," the elder commanded. "Show me what a pathfinder looks like." Kira glanced at Kieran, seeking permission or perhaps courage. He nodded, and she felt the familiar surge of power rising within her. She shifted into her wolf form, the silver, luminous wolf marked with ancient runes, and stood before the council in all her impossible glory. The reaction was immediate and profound. Some of the younger pack members fell to their knees instinctively, their wolves recognizing the presence of something far greater than themselves. Even Elder Morrigan stepped back, her aged eyes widening. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the tremor of age and emotion. "I had hoped," she said quietly, "in my darkest moments, that the Pathfinder would return. When you rejected this Omega, Kieran, I thought perhaps the goddess had moved on, had deemed our kind too broken for redemption. But now—" She turned to face the full council, her voice rising with authority. "Now I see that what appeared to be rejection was actually preparation. The Pathfinder required a mate tested by his own hands, tempered by his own fire, and Kieran Blackthorn has passed that test." She turned back to Kira, and to everyone's shock, she lowered herself to one knee in the ancient gesture of submission and respect reserved only for the goddess herself. "Pathfinder," Elder Morrigan said, her voice ringing through the great hall, "if you will have our pack, we will have you. We will stand beside you and your mate. We will defend your destiny with our lives." One by one, the other council members rose and knelt until the entire assembly was prostrate before Kira. The younger wolves followed, then the warriors, then the cubs and the elderly, who could barely move but made the effort anyway. Kira felt tears streaming down her lupine face as she looked at Kieran. Through their bond, she could feel his emotions: relief, joy, fear, hope, all of it mingling together like colors bleeding into one another. She shifted back to human form and made her way to Elder Morrigan, extending her hand to help the ancient wolf rise. "I do not ask for submission," Kira said quietly, her voice still carrying the harmonics of Pathfinder power. "I ask only for acceptance, for partnership, for the chance to help heal what has been broken." Elder Morrigan took her hand and pulled herself upright. "That, child, is exactly what makes you worthy of your destiny." As the council rose around them, Kieran moved to Kira's side and took her hand, and in that moment, something shifted in the world. The barriers between human and wolf, between Alpha and Omega, between past and future, seemed to dissolve. The redemption that had begun in a frozen valley was spreading, like silver light through ice, transforming everything it touched. 3 months later, the Northern Pack gathered at the sacred temple carved into the heart of the highest mountain. The structure was ancient beyond measure, its walls inscribed with runes that predated language itself. This was where mate bonds were finalized, where the goddess was believed to walk the earth in spirit, where the most profound commitments were witnessed by forces greater than any individual wolf. Kira stood in a chamber of white stone, alone except for the servant wolves who helped her dress in garments woven from moon-silver thread. The fabric seemed to glow from within, and when she moved, it caught the light in ways that seemed impossible. Around her wrists and ankles, they fastened delicate chains of silver, marked with the same ancient runes that covered her wolf form. In a chamber across the temple, Kieran was undergoing his own preparations, stripping away the trappings of kingship to stand before the goddess and his people as nothing more or less than a wolf who had chosen his true mate. Kira's heart was racing as the servant wolves led her toward the central chamber. She could feel Kieran through their bond, feel his anticipation and his nervous energy, feel his overwhelming love for her. It was strange to think that just a few months ago he had stood before the same pack and denied her existence. Now he was about to commit his entire being to her in a ceremony that would bind them not just spiritually, but physically and temporally as well. The ceremony itself was ancient and beautiful. Kira and Kieran faced each other in the center of the temple chamber, surrounded by the assembled pack. Elder Morrigan stood between them, her silver fur gleaming in the light of 1,000 candles. "You come before the goddess and your people," Elder Morrigan intoned, her voice carrying the weight of ritual and truth, "to finalize a bond that has already been written into the fabric of your souls. Do you, Kieran Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Pack, accept this Omega as your mate for this lifetime and all that follow? Do you commit to defend her, to cherish her, to support her destiny even when it frightens you?" Kieran's eyes burned with gold light as he looked at Kira. "I do. With every fiber of my being, I do." "And do you, Kira of the Frozen Valley, accept this Alpha as your mate for this lifetime and all that follow? Do you commit to stand beside him, to heal his wounds, to help him carry the weight of his crown?" Kira's voice was steady and clear. "I do. With every heartbeat, I do." "Then let the goddess bear witness," Elder Morrigan pronounced. The chamber exploded in silver light. It poured down from the ceiling in a cascade, and Kira felt it engulf her entirely. Through the light, she could see Kieran experiencing the same profound sensation. They rushed toward each other, and when they collided, it was not a violent impact, but a joining, a merging of souls that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering in the dark. Their skins began to shine with silvery luminescence, and new marks appeared on both of them, intricate patterns that seemed to tell the story of their journey together. Rejection and exile, discovery and redemption, pain transformed into power. The marks covered their bodies in an ever-shifting tapestry of meaning and purpose. When the light finally faded, they fell to their knees, gasping and trembling from the intensity of what they had experienced. Kieran pulled Kira close, burying his face in her hair, and she could feel him crying, tears of relief, tears of joy, tears of gratitude for being given a second chance at love. The pack erupted in howls, not the aggressive sounds of a challenge, but the joyful chorus of a people welcoming their queen and affirming their king. Even the elder wolves, who had seen countless Matabon ceremonies, were visibly moved by what they had witnessed. But as the celebration reached its peak, Kira felt something shift. Through their newly solidified bond, she felt a warning from Kieran, a sense of danger approaching. Someone had witnessed their ceremony, someone who did not wish them well. She pulled Kieran close and whispered, "There's someone coming, someone with intention toward us." Kieran nodded, his expression darkening. "I know. I've felt it too. But not tonight. Tonight, we celebrate. Let our enemy wait until tomorrow. Tonight, we are simply mates, simply happy, simply alive." So they moved through the celebration in a daze of joy and union, knowing that the trials ahead would be severe. But none of it could touch them tonight, in this moment of perfect understanding and acceptance. They had been forged in pain and had emerged transformed. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The final battle came not in violence, but in revelation. It began as dawn broke over the frozen valley. A wolf approached the northern pack's territory, bearing a white flag, the symbol of truce and negotiation. When she was brought before Kieran and Kira, both of whom had been awaiting this confrontation, they saw immediately who it was. Ilara, Kieran's first mate. But that was impossible. Ilara had been dead for 20 years, burned alive in a cage of silver. Kieran had felt her death through their bond, a searing pain that had nearly destroyed him. Yet here she stood, exactly as she had been in her final days, unchanged by time or suffering. "Hello, my love," Ilara said, her voice like honey mixed with poison. "Did you miss me?" Kieran staggered backward, and Kira felt his shock and horror flood through their bond. But she also felt something else, something that didn't match the narrative he had carried with him for 2 decades. "You're not real," Kira said, stepping in front of Kieran. "Or you're not who you claim to be." Ilara's expression flickered, and her form seemed to shimmer for just a moment. "Clever," she said softly. "The Pathfinder sees through illusions. How inconvenient." She shifted, her form changing into something else entirely. Not a wolf, but something older and far more terrible. A creature made of shadow and regret, a manifestation of Kieran's guilt given physical form. "I am not Ilara," the creature said, and its voice was 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "I am the weight of the trauma your first mate's death left in your soul. I am the wound that would not heal. I am the reason you rejected this new mate, because you could not bear the thought of losing another." Kieran fell to his knees, and Kira felt the truth of the creature's words through him. This thing had been haunting him for 20 years, a phantom born from his own guilt and fear. "But Ilara did not die in anger," Kira said, understanding flooding through her as she accessed the old memories through Kieran's connection to the phantom. "She died in peace. She died accepting her fate and telling you to forgive yourself." "No," the creature hissed. "That cannot be true. The pain is the truth. The suffering is the evidence." "No," Kira said firmly. "The pain is the lie. It's the story you told yourself, so you wouldn't have to let go." She stepped toward the phantom, and her silver light began to pour from her body. As a pathfinder, she could see the threads of fate, the connections between past and present, the truths that underlay all other truths. "Ilara did die," Kira said gently, "but she died with love in her heart, not anger. And she had one final message for you, Kieran. She's been trying to deliver it for 20 years through every path that presented itself." Kira raised her hand, and the phantom began to dissolve, its form losing cohesion as the Pathfinder's power burned away the shadows of self-inflicted suffering. "What was the message?" Kieran whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive yourself," Kira said. "Let go of the pain, and most importantly, live, love again. Find your true mate and build a life with her. Don't waste what remains of your existence mourning what was taken. Make something beautiful from what you still have." As the phantom finally dissipated, Kieran felt the 20-year-old wound in his heart close, not healing perfectly. Such things never do. But sealing in a way that allowed light to enter where only darkness had lived before. He rose to his feet and took Kira in his arms, and this time his tears were tears of release, of finally letting go of a burden that was never meant to be carried alone. "How did you know?" he whispered against her hair. "Because you're my mate," Kira replied. "Because our bond connects not just our present, but our pasts and our futures as well. And because the goddess showed me that Ilara has been watching over us. She's been the quiet voice guiding me toward you. She knew that the one who could truly help you heal was not another version of herself, but someone entirely new. Someone strong enough to stand beside you as an equal." Kieran pulled back just enough to look at her, and his golden eyes were no longer haunted. They held depth and wisdom and the particular beauty of a soul that had journeyed through darkness and emerged still capable of loving. "I don't deserve you," he said, and it was both apology and acceptance. "No," Kira agreed with a slight smile. "You don't, but I'm choosing you anyway." He kissed her then, and it was gentle and profound and absolutely true. Around them, the Northern Pack watched as their Alpha King and their Pathfinder Queen stood together in the dawn light, finally, at last, healed. In the distance, a white raven soared across the sky, carrying with it the blessing of one who had loved before and who was finally at peace. And in that moment, the cycle of suffering that had begun 20 years ago came to its natural and beautiful conclusion. Redemption, it turned out, did not require perfection. It only required the willingness to transform pain into purpose and to accept love even when you thought you had no right to it. Kieran and Kira stood together as the sun climbed higher, and neither of them looked back at the darkness they had survived. They were only watching the light ahead. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.